it becomes a spider mite magnet. Trust me on that. Hello everyone, I'm Adina from plantsbutbetter, and today we're talking about this beautiful giant Philodendron Pedatum. I have with me two plants, well, a plant and a propagation. I love this plant. I keep admiring it every time I see it. On our website we have a care meter in which we classify each plant, how easy it is to care for it. And I would give this plant an 8 out of 10 because not every home is the same and it will need some attention to make it happy. And that's why you should keep watching. Let's talk about light. So as you guessed it, Philodendron Pedatum really needs a lot of bright indirect light. The better the light, the better the growing. And I tried to grow it with medium light as well. It does grow, but it's not happy. I mean, if you don't have enough light, the leaves will get smaller and smaller. This one was helped with grow lights, so you can definitely use those if you don't have enough light in your home. It can survive in medium light, but it's not ideal. I would not recommend that. Moving on to watering. I usually let the substrate dry out almost completely before waterings because my place is a bit colder. For reference, I water mine maybe once every 10 to 15 days during summer and once every 3 weeks during winter. But that's because it has a really large pot that can store a lot of water. So if your pot is a bit smaller, you may adjust the watering schedule a bit. Philodendron Pedatum doesn't like excess water and it will get root rot if you're not careful enough. So overall, it's better to underwater this plant. It will not get mad at you if you forget to water it for a few days. Moving on to temperature. I keep this plant in 23 to 24 at best degrees Celsius. You can definitely go higher. You can go a bit lower as well, maybe 20 degrees, but not lower than that. Not lower than 15 degrees actually. Unfortunately, cold damage is undoable, and if you keep this plant in colder temperatures, it can cause leaf damage, it can cause root damage, it can cause any type of damage you can imagine. And why would you do that to your plants? I mean, why? You keep it in those average home temperatures and it should be fine. Moving on to humidity. Frankly, I find this plant quite friendly and adaptable. So I grow mine in average humidity, somewhere around 50 to 70%. You can go higher, but definitely not lower, because lower humidity will attract spider mites. And those are a pain in the ass. If you have a lower humidity than that, you can help it with a humidifier. Because even though it's adaptable, it will not be ideal if you grow it in dry air. It becomes a spider mite magnet. Trust me on that. Moving on to fertilizing. How often should you feed your plant? I fertilize my philodendron once a month during growing season and once every 2 months during winter time if the plant is still growing. But if you don't see any growth, if your plant is dormant, you should stop fertilizing. If it's not growing, it doesn't need feeding. I use an NPK ratio of 10-10-10 or 20-20-20, as it's the case with all my plants. But I tried other ratios in the past and I find that this plant is fine with almost anything. If you have a fertilizer richer in nitrogen, this plant doesn't have any problems. Moving on to substrate. It's time to remind you again, if you're familiar with the care videos, about that lightweight substrate, because this plant doesn't like excess water. I had root rot on this before, not on this plant specifically, on Philodendron Pedatum, and one of the reasons for the root rot problems is actually the low quality soil. So your soil, your substrate should be as light as possible. So to give you an example, I use for mine some regular potting soil with some perlite, some coco coir, and some orchid bark or some pine barks in equal quantities. This mix provides a great drainage, but you can use any mix that will help the water evaporate faster and that has a normal pH level. Please don't use just regular potting soil unless you really know what you're doing, because regular potting soil is usually too heavy on the roots, and if you overwater this plant, your chances for root rot are way higher than with a lightweight mix. But if you have just that in your disposal, please consider adding at least 50 to 60% perlite, because that will make a great difference. Let's move on to plastic versus terracotta. And I find this plant to be quite adaptable, so it can grow well in both. I have mine in plastic, so this is just a planter. Terracotta is porous and it helps the water evaporate more quickly, and that's a good thing if you're worried about overwatering. But if you don't like heavy pots like me, you will do better with plastic. And that's all I had to say on this segment. Moving on to repotting. So this philodendron wants repotting only when it's strictly necessary. Let's check if this one wants repotting, and the answer is not yet. If you see the roots coming out of the pot, not just some tiny roots, if you see massive growth coming out of the pot, or if you see your leaves yellowing for no reason, even though the watering schedule didn't change or the place for your plant didn't change, that means you should check the roots. It is good to repot during growing season, but not completely necessary. I'm saying that because in this period of time, the roots can recover faster. Choose a pot that is slightly bigger than the previous one. Gently separate those roots, add your favorite lightweight mix, and then you're good to go. Let's move on to propagation. So it's time for this bad boy to show off. So as you can see, this is a water propagation. Let's see if my camera can focus it. So you need segments that will contain at least one node. Just go a bit there so you can focus on the little one. I have 2 nodes on my cutting that are giving me some good quality roots. This is not ready for soil, at least in my opinion. I will wait a bit longer. Well, I'm filming this in late November and it's definitely not a good time to place this plant into soil. It's too cold for me and for the plant as well. Anyway, you can do your propagations in water or directly into soil. I didn't have much success directly into soil, and that's why I will not recommend it to you, but you can try it if your home is a bit warmer and if it has great humidity. Another way that you can propagate this plant is by leafless stem cuttings, and this is a great method if your plant grew up leggy. So you need to cut your plant into segments. So let's imagine that this segment doesn't have a leaf. You have to cut it above and below the node. Place your segment in a clean container with some sphagnum moss or maybe some coco coir. Spray it with some water, place it into a zip bag, and then wait a couple of weeks or maybe more, and then you'll get new plants. You can also propagate this plant by air layering, but we will talk about that in a different video. This is very simple to do as well. And let's move on to the next segment because I'm on 50% battery and I really want to finish this video. And yes, in this section I'm gonna talk about spider mites and thrips. You can avoid spider mites if your humidity is higher, but if you get thrips, you really need to spot them in time. The greater the infestation, the lower the chances of recovery, unfortunately. Inspect the plant every time you water it. This is how you can spot any problems in time. And moving on to toxicity, unfortunately this plant is not pet friendly, so I would keep it far away from any curious pets. Well, that was it with the care video. If you like this video and you want to help the channel grow, give it a thumbs up because this will actually help spread the message. If you have any questions that I didn't answer, you can leave them in the comments. And until next time, don't forget to take care of yourself and your plants.